We're going to continue on in the book of John today. And so we're going to be looking at actually uh, John chapter 8, verse 12 as we go through. So let me read that. It says, Then Jesus spoke to them again. I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have light, the light of life. Okay, at verse 13, so the Pharisee said to him, You are testifying about yourself. Your testimony is not valid. So, uh, you know, this happened just after you remember that Jesus had forgiven the adulteress. Then, and if you remember, the Pharisees were part of that too. They had actually brought this woman, said she was caught in adultery. They didn't bring the man, so they just brought her, and they moved their way up into the center of people, and put her there, and then explained to everybody that what had taken place and so forth. And if you remember, Jesus wasn't quick to talk. You remember that he actually knelt down and wrote in the sand. And as he was writing in the sand, it says that they began to leave one at a time, starting with the oldest, okay, that was there. And so we go from there right to here, where they're still trying to uh, get Jesus to, well, they're wanting to arrest him, and they're trying to bring him to this place where he trips up, and they can arrest him for something that he said. So here he is, and this is what comes. This is what he speaks to them. I am the light of the world, and that's what he says. It goes back to actually John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. His life is the light of man, is what it said. And the Greek word for light is phos, and it means to illuminate or to make manifest. But it's made up of two root words. The first is fahino, and this word means to lighten and to show. The second is phami, and it means to show or to make known one's thoughts, and can mean to speak or to say, that kind of thing. And if you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the Hebrew word for darkness is koshak, and it means darkness, but it also means misery, destruction, evil. So misery, destruction, and evil were over the face of the earth. And if you look at Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 to 22, this was during the plagues, when during the exodus of Israel from Egypt, and it says there was darkness that could be felt, or there's a darkness that came over Egypt that could be felt, or misery, a sense of destruction and evil that could be felt. Okay, so I want to just pause there for a minute, because it also says that those that were Israel were in Goshen had light. Okay, and the word light there can mean light. It's or, and it could mean light, but it also means happiness. Okay, and so the Israelites were in a place where there was light and there was happiness. There was joy instead of the darkness that could be felt. So what is being said here is that Jesus is the source of life. And no one can find life or know what life is really without him. He is the originator of life. He is. And that's what it's saying, is he's not only the originator of life, but he is one that gives life. Now, think about this. If the world is devoid of his presence, then no one would be able to know what life is, or where to find life. Okay, so that is key, that we have to think about it. But if you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, it could be that what is being talked about is the light of life is removed for this period of time, allowing darkness to once again be felt, as in Exodus chapter 10, verse 21 and 22. So let's think about this for just in the creation. The earth was dark, evil, miserable, and destruction was on the face of the earth. Genesis 1. Then God spoke light. Okay, the word light in Hebrew, or means illumination, but it also means clear and happiness, telling us that light can be felt as well. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 through 11, they partook of the fruit, and they hid from the light when they heard him coming. Okay, you remember they'd taken from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and when he came, we know he's light. When he came, they hid from the light. Okay, now this is kind of interesting because we've actually seen this in other parts of the scripture, as we've looked at other parts of scripture, and it tells us that the light exposes the darkness, exposes everything in the darkness. So there was really no way out of this after they had taken that fruit, other than to face it and face God, because the light exposes in the darkness. It exposes all that's there. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 through 11, they partook of that fruit, okay? And that brought darkness. That brought their nakedness. It was exposed, okay? And if you look at Genesis chapter 3, 11 through 20, only as man allows to be exposed to the light can we find covering for his present state. Okay, and in 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 through 10, we must walk with him in the light to have fellowship with one another, because he is the light. Okay, so let's go deeper. If you look back in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, you see where the light came from. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And that's important for us to know. If we're looking for light, we can't turn anywhere else but to the light. And that's the bottom line. And if you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 16, God made two greater lights, one to rule the day and one to rule the night. And if there was light in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, what is this that in Genesis 1:16? Let's go back to 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. This is the message we heard from him and declare to you. God is light, and there is no darkness in him. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, giving light to the earth before there was a created light to rule the sky, the day. And look back at Exodus chapter 10, verse 21 through 22. Once again, there was a darkness that could be felt in Egypt. This word in the Hebrew is koshek. I told you that just a little bit earlier. And is darkness, misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, and wickedness is what that word could be translated. And if you look at Job chapter 10, verses 20 through 22, this darkness is the same word in Hebrew, the koshek, that is used both in Genesis and Exodus passages, and we can see this in the passages of Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, chapter 59, verse 9, which help us to define the word koshek, misery, destruction, etc. In Isaiah 5:9, obscurity, okay, is what is the word also added to the definition of koshek. And so back to Exodus 10, 21 through 23, all of Egypt was plunged into darkness, and that could be felt. The misery, destruction, evil. But look at verse 23. The Israelite had light in the Hebrew word or, and it actually means illumination. It can mean happiness. So the Egyptians had misery and destruction, and while the Israelites had happiness. And so now here's one for you. in the Hebrew text, there's Aleph Toph in the verse and right after the verse between Elohim and the sky, earth, and verse 4, there is an Aleph Toph between God and the light, which was good, and he made a separation between. Okay, there was a separation between the two. Okay, so Aleph Toph is of course the first and last letter in Hebrew alphabet, but so is. But if you look at uh, in the Greek, it's the Alpha and the Omega, and you've all heard of that. The first and the last. He is the first and the last. So if you're speaking Hebrew, it would be the Aleph Toph. But if you're speaking Greek, it would of course be the Alpha and the Omega. To that so identifies him. Okay, now the word separated in the Hebrew is bain, and it means that he made a distinction between light and the darkness. We see that played out in Exodus chapter 10, verse 21 through 13. Egypt had darkness, Israel had light. We also see it in 1 John chapter 1, verse 6. We say we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness. We're lying and we're not practicing the truth. If you look at John chapter 12, verse 44 through 50, and look specifically at verse 46, we come into the light so that everyone who believes in me, not me, but Jesus, would not remain in darkness. Okay, in Revelation chapter 21, verses 21 through 27, verse 23, the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, because God's glory illuminates it, and the lamp is the Lamb. Okay, if you look at Revelation chapter 2, verse 1, he walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Okay, and if you look back at Revelation 21:27, nothing profane will ever enter, and no one who does what is vile or false will be there, but only those whose name is written in the book of life. Okay, and so we can see that there's a separation that goes on between the light and the darkness. And if you look at Exodus chapter 32, verses 25 through 35, this is where Israel had worshipped the golden calf, and Moses came down, and he sees that it's out of control. Okay, because they're in the middle of this worship of this calf. And if you look at verses 31 through 35, Moses goes back from God and tells God that they have committed a grave sin by worshiping a golden god. And Moses begins to call out to God for his forgiveness for their sin, but goes on to tell God that if he will not forgive them, then he wants Yahweh, or to God, to erase him out of the book of that he has written. And God's response is, I will erase whoever has sinned against me from my book. And it will be the way that he settles accounts, and they will be held accountable for their actions. Okay, and so and if you look at Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, Daniel is receiving instructions about end times, and God is telling him about the fate of Israel. And if you notice in verse 1, all who are found in the book will escape, and those who have not been erased from the book. Okay? And if you look at Psalm chapter 69, verses 19 through 28, this is a passage that would describe Jesus. But if you look at verse 28, the prayer is to erase the unrighteous out of the book of life, and not to let them be listed with the righteous. And so we could look at this and see that there is a book where everyone who has lived has been written into the book, and their choice of works and what they do, their choices, and Jesus is what determines if we're there or erased. Okay, and at the same time, he settles accounts with each one of us. Okay, and this understanding has everything to do with walking in the light in John chapter 8, verse 12. But I want you to see one more thing. In verse 12, Jesus says, I am, okay? Which is from Exodus 3:4 or 3:14, excuse me, which is when Moses asked God who he should tell Israel that he is if they ask. And he says, tell them I am who I am. And Moses goes to say, I am has sent me. Okay, I am has sent me, and so they would have known what he was saying. So great study on this light and what Jesus was actually saying. It's pretty amazing, the stuff that you get when you really get a chance to dig into it and learn just about what it is that he's saying here. So